Sede vacant. It's Latin for the empty seat, and it's the term the Catholic Church uses for one of the strangest, most delicate periods in its entire structure, the time between one pope's departure and the next one's arrival. Most of the time, this period lasts a couple of weeks and passes without much drama. But throughout history, Sede vacant hasn't always been calm. It's been the setting for political scheming, years-long deadlocks, and even moments where rival claimants split the church in two. In this video, we're looking at what actually changes during this period, some of history's most dramatic vacancies, the popes who resigned rather than died in office, and why the modern church has worked so hard to make sure this period never spirals out of control again. Welcome to Pope Pulse. This is part 4 in our conclave series. If you haven't seen the earlier videos on what happens right after a pope dies and how the conclave vote actually works, you'll want to watch those too. Let's get into it. During Sede Vacante, the Catholic Church doesn't stop functioning. Bishops around the world continue running their dioceses. Priests continue celebrating Mass and administering sacraments. Parish life, schools, hospitals, and charities connected to the Church all continue exactly as before. The vacancy affects the top of the structure, not the whole structure. What does change is anything that requires the Pope's direct authority. No new bishops can be appointed anywhere in the world during this period. No new cardinals can be created. Major Vatican departments, known as dicasteries, generally pause significant new initiatives and switch into a caretaker mode, continuing routine work but avoiding anything that would commit a future pope to a direction he hasn't chosen himself. Certain Vatican officials automatically lose their positions the moment the papacy becomes vacant, most notably the heads of the various Vatican departments, who technically cease to hold their posts until either reconfirmed or replaced by the new pope. A small number of key roles continue regardless, specifically to keep basic operations running, the Camerlengo, who we've covered before, along with a few other administrative and security-related offices. Even the Swiss Guard's role shifts slightly during this period, with added ceremonial and security duties tied to protecting the conclave itself once it begins. And diplomatically, foreign governments with relations to the Holy See continue functioning through their existing ambassadors, since diplomatic relations are with the Holy See as an institution, not tied to any one pope personally. In short, the machinery keeps running. It just runs in a deliberately limited, cautious mode, waiting for someone to take the wheel again. We've already told the story of the Viterbo conclave in an earlier video, the nearly 3-year vacancy in the 13th century that ended with locals literally removing the roof of the building where cardinals were meeting. But that wasn't the only time Sede Vacante turned into a genuine crisis. During the period known as the Western Schism in the late 14th and early 15th centuries, the Church experienced something almost unthinkable: multiple men simultaneously claiming to be the legitimate pope, each backed by different European political powers. This wasn't a simple case of an empty seat taking too long to fill. It was a case of the seat appearing to be filled multiple times over, with different courts, different cardinals, and different countries recognizing different claimants. The confusion lasted decades and was only resolved through the Council of Constance, which eventually secured the resignation or removal of the rival claimants and cleared the way for a single, universally recognized pope to be elected. Political interference was a recurring theme in many of history's Messier vacancies. European monarchs, particularly French and Spanish kings in earlier centuries, would sometimes pressure cardinals directly, hoping to secure a pope sympathetic to their political interests. Some vacancies dragged on specifically because outside powers were maneuvering behind the scenes, trying to block candidates they didn't want, rather than because cardinals genuinely couldn't reach consensus on their own. These episodes are part of why the modern conclave process is so tightly sealed and so aggressively focused on preventing outside communication. Every rule about sequestration and secrecy that seems almost excessive today exists because, historically, leaving any gap for outside influence reliably led to exactly the kind of chaos we're describing. Sede Vacante doesn't only happen because a pope dies. It also happens when a pope resigns. And while that's extremely rare, it has happened, and each case is worth knowing. The earliest widely accepted case is Pope Celestine V, elected in 1294. He was a hermit before becoming pope, reportedly uncomfortable with the political demands and administrative complexity of the role almost immediately. After only about 5 months, he formally resigned, choosing to return to a simpler religious life rather than continue as pope. His resignation was significant enough that it later required a specific ruling confirming that a pope actually could resign, since at the time it wasn't entirely settled that the office allowed for that possibility. The next major case came over a century later, during the Western Schism we just discussed. Pope Gregory XII agreed to resign in 1415 specifically to help resolve the multiple claimant crisis, clearing the way for a single new pope to be elected without dispute. His resignation was less about personal preference and more about ending a church-wide emergency, arguably one of the most consequential resignations in papal history, precisely because of what it made possible afterward. Then, after nearly 600 years without another papal resignation, Pope Benedict XVI resigned in February of 2013, citing his advanced age and declining physical strength as reasons he no longer felt capable of carrying out the demands of the office. It was a genuinely stunning moment for the modern church. Many Catholics alive at the time had never experienced anything but a pope serving until death, since that had become the assumed norm over the preceding centuries. His resignation still triggered the same Sede Vacante period as a death would, followed by the same conclave process, which concluded in under 2 weeks with the election of Pope Francis. What's notable across all 3 of these cases is that resignation doesn't shortcut or simplify the process at all. The Church treats a resignation-triggered vacancy essentially the same way it treats a death-triggered one, with the same rules, the same sequestration, and the same conclave procedure that follows. Given how badly some historical vacancies went, it's worth asking, why don't modern conclaves drag on for years anymore? Part of the answer is simply practical. Air travel means cardinals from every continent can reach Rome within days rather than weeks or months, removing one of the biggest historical reasons vacancies used to stretch out. Modern communication also means cardinals arrive already generally aware of the state of the church and the leading candidates, rather than needing extended time on the ground to get their bearings. Part of the answer is procedural. The fixed window requiring a conclave to begin within roughly 15 to 20 days after a vacancy begins didn't always exist in its current, strict form. It's the product of centuries of refinement specifically aimed at preventing indefinite delay. Historical rules like shrinking food rations the longer voting dragged on, first introduced after the Viterbo crisis, established a permanent principle that conclaves should feel urgent, not leisurely. And part of the answer is cultural. Modern cardinals largely see rapid, decisive action as a mark of institutional health, especially with global media attention focused on the Vatican the moment a vacancy begins. A conclave that dragged on for months today wouldn't just be historically unusual, it would be seen as a genuine institutional failure, visible to the entire world in real time. That pressure alone helps keep modern conclaves moving quickly, typically resolving within 2 to 4 days. It's worth stepping back and asking why any of this matters beyond church history itself. Sede Vacante is really a case study in institutional continuity, how a 2,000-year-old organization handles the total absence of its top leader without collapsing, splitting apart, or losing basic function. Very few institutions anywhere in the world have needed to solve this problem across so many centuries, under so many different political and technological conditions, and refine their answer as consistently as the Catholic Church has. Whether or not you're Catholic, there's something genuinely interesting in watching an organization build, test, break, and rebuild its own succession process again and again over the better part of a millennium, until it arrived at something as tightly structured as what exists today. That's the story of Sede Vacante. Not just an administrative pause, but a period that's tested, and occasionally broken, the Church's own systems more than once in its history. If you found this interesting, subscribe for the rest of this series, and let me know in the comments which historical vacancy surprised you the most.